Nobody planned for it to happen. Nobody was watching for it. And when it was over, it lasted less than 2 minutes. But those who saw it said they never forgot it. Not because it was loud or dramatic or grand. They remembered it because it was quiet, unexpected, and deeply human, the kind of moment that reminds you that even the most rigid walls in the world have a soft place hidden somewhere inside them. It began, as most unexpected things do, on an ordinary morning. The date was the third week of October 2019. The leaves in Windsor Great Park had already turned, deep gold and burnt orange, the kind that crunch pleasantly underfoot and make autumn feel like a gift. The morning air was cool but not cold, and a pale, clean light stretched across the wide green paths that ran beside the castle grounds. For most visitors, Windsor Great Park is a place to walk the dog or take photographs. For the British royal family, it is something closer to a backyard, familiar, private, and beloved. On that particular morning, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, had decided to spend a few relaxed hours outside with their 3 children. It was not a public event. There were no cameras permitted, no official schedule, no formal agenda. Just a family, a wide park, and a rare free morning. The Royal Protection Team was present, as always, but kept a careful distance. The palace staff who were nearby went quietly about their duties, trying not to intrude on what everyone understood to be one of the very few truly private hours the family ever enjoyed. George, the eldest, was 8 years old at the time and already showing signs of the quiet seriousness that would define him as he grew. He had found a long stick somewhere and was using it to investigate a patch of muddy ground near a hedgerow. Louis, the youngest, had only recently learned to walk with proper confidence and was using that confidence to toddle in every direction at once, laughing each time he nearly fell. And Charlotte, 4 years old, bright-eyed, and already showing the kind of determined spirit that would one day become one of her most talked-about qualities, was moving along the path ahead of her brothers, looking at everything around her with wide, serious attention. Charlotte had always loved animals. This was well known within the household. She talked to birds through the window. She named the squirrels that appeared on the garden wall. When the family's dog trotted past, she would stop whatever she was doing and greet it with the full sincerity of someone meeting an old friend. There was something genuine in the way she responded to creatures, not the squealing, reaching excitement of many small children, but something quieter and more attentive. She paid attention to animals the way some children pay attention to stories. So when a small shape appeared at the base of the hedgerow just ahead of her, Charlotte stopped immediately. It was a fox cub. Small, rust-colored, with a white-tipped tail and enormous ears that seemed almost too large for its narrow face. Under different circumstances, it would have been a delightful surprise, the kind of thing you might see on a nature program and feel lucky to witness in real life. But this cub was not simply wandering. It was struggling. One of its front legs was caught in a small loop of old wire, the kind that sometimes remains tangled in long hedgerows, left behind from old fence repairs that nobody ever fully cleared away. The wire was not cutting the animal, but it held the cub's paw firmly to the ground. Every time the fox tried to move, it stumbled. It had stopped trying to run. It sat in the mud with its leg pulled awkwardly sideways, making a soft, low sound that was not quite a cry but was unmistakably distress. Charlotte stood perfectly still and looked at it. Then her face changed. Her chin dropped. Her eyes filled quickly. And before her mother, who was perhaps 30 meters behind her, could reach her, Charlotte had already turned and begun looking around her with the focused urgency of someone searching for a solution. She looked at the path. She looked at the tree-line. She looked back at her mother, who was too far away. She looked at the protection officers, who were even further. And then she looked to her left, where the path curved slightly and the east-facing wall of the castle grounds ran in a long, straight line, and she saw him. Guardsman Thomas Hayward was 24 years old and had been serving with the Coldstream Guards for 3 years. On that morning, he was posted at a ceremonial position along the east perimeter path, a role that required him to stand perfectly still in full uniform for the duration of his watch. The Coldstream Guards are one of the oldest and most respected regiments in the British Army. Their history stretches back to the 1650s. They have served at every major moment in British history. And they are known, above almost everything else, for their discipline. A Coldstream Guard does not fidget. He does not speak to passing civilians. He does not look around with curiosity. He stands. He watches. He remains. Hayward was doing exactly that when he heard small footsteps approaching him at speed. Charlotte came to a stop directly in front of him. Her face was wet. She was breathing quickly from the effort of running. She looked up at him, this tall, still, scarlet-coated figure with a bearskin hat and a ceremonial rifle and an expression trained to give away absolutely nothing, and she spoke. 5 words. Quiet. Clear. Completely without hesitation. Please. The fox needs help. And then she waited. Hayward did not move. His eyes remained forward. His expression did not change. From the outside, he appeared to be a statue, entirely unmoved by the small tear-streaked face looking up at him. Several seconds passed. Charlotte did not step back. She did not repeat herself. She simply waited, with the patience of a child who has been told that waiting is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. What was happening inside Hayward's mind during those seconds is something only he truly knows. He would later describe it, in private conversation, as the strangest few moments of his military career. Every piece of his training told him to remain where he was. Protocol was not a suggestion in the Coldstream Guards, it was the entire point. The regiment's value, its history, its identity, was built on the idea that the uniform meant something. That a guardsman at his post was not a person making individual choices, but a living symbol of something larger than himself. Breaking formation, for any reason, under almost any circumstances, was not simply a rule. It was the thing the rule existed to protect. But the child in front of him was not asking him to do something foolish or careless. She was not testing him. She was not playing a game. She was 4 years old, and she was frightened for a small animal that was in pain, and she had walked up to the one person she thought could help, and she had asked. Hayward's eyes moved. Just slightly. Just for a moment. He looked down at Charlotte, and then, following the direction she had come from, he looked toward the hedgerow. He could see the fox from where he stood. What happened next was described differently by each person who witnessed it. Some said it was fast. Some said it felt slow. One member of the household staff who was present said it felt like watching someone make a very quiet, very private decision, the kind that nobody announces, the kind that simply becomes visible through action. Hayward lowered his ceremonial rifle to a resting position. He took precisely 2 steps forward, just enough to cross the invisible boundary of his formal post. He did not run. He did not rush. He walked, with the same controlled economy of movement that years of military training had built into every step he took, toward the hedgerow. He knelt down beside the fox. His white gloves, part of the formal ceremonial uniform, were not ideal for delicate work, but he used them carefully, his fingers finding the loop of wire with practiced patience. The fox, which might have been expected to struggle or snap, went almost still. It seemed, in that moment, to understand. The wire came free in under 90 seconds. The fox cub sat for a single, stunned moment, its paw now free, its small chest rising and falling quickly, and then it was gone, slipping back through the base of the hedgerow and vanishing into the undergrowth as if the whole thing had never happened. Not a sound. Not a trace. Just an empty patch of mud where a small creature had been frightened, and then helped, and then released. Hayward stood. He smoothed the front of his tunic with one hand. He turned, walked the 2 steps back to his mark, and returned his rifle to the correct formal carry position. He looked forward again. His expression was, as it had been before, entirely composed and unreadable. Except, and every person who was watching agreed on this, for the very briefest moment, at the left corner of his mouth, something moved. It was not a smile, exactly. It was smaller than that. It was the ghost of a smile. The kind that a person allows themselves when they are not supposed to be smiling, and they know it, and they do not quite care. Charlotte watched all of this without moving. When it was done, when the fox was gone and the guardsman had returned to his position, she stood quietly for a moment, looking at the empty hedgerow. Then she turned back to face Hayward. And she did something that nobody had suggested or rehearsed or asked of her. She placed one foot behind the other, held the sides of her small coat, and gave him a formal curtsy. Slow. Deliberate. The kind she had clearly been taught for ceremonies and important moments, now offered to a soldier standing at a post on a muddy October morning in a public park. Then she turned and ran back to her mother. Catherine had seen the whole thing from a distance. She had not intervened. Those who were nearby said she had gone still when Charlotte first approached the guardsman, and that she had remained still throughout, watching. She said nothing when Charlotte reached her. She simply placed her hand gently on her daughter's head for a moment, in the way that parents do when words are not necessary. Later that afternoon, an inquiry was made through the proper channels to identify which guardsman had been posted at that location during that time. The staff who made the inquiry were careful to say nothing about why. They gave no indication of what was coming. Within the regiment, the discovery that a guardsman had stepped off his post, even for 90 seconds, even to free a trapped animal, even in view of a member of the royal family, was the kind of thing that was taken seriously. There were procedures. There were conversations to be had. The conversation that Hayward had was not the one anyone expected. A letter reached him within the week. It came through official channels and was written in the formal, careful language that the palace and the regiment both tend to use when they want to say something important without saying too much. The letter did not praise him for breaking protocol. It was very careful about that. Protocol, it noted, existed for important reasons, and those reasons had not changed. What the letter did say, what it concluded with, in a single closing paragraph, was that Guardsman Hayward had demonstrated, in a moment of quiet decision, the values that the regiment had always held at its center: courage, composure, and what the letter called quiet compassion. He was not reprimanded. He received a private commendation. The story was never officially confirmed by the palace. It circulated for years in the way that true stories often do, quietly, passed from one person to another, growing slightly different in the telling but never losing its shape. Royal correspondents heard fragments of it. Household staff mentioned it in the background of larger interviews. It appeared, briefly and without names, in at least one memoir written by a person who had been on the grounds that day. What made it travel, perhaps, was not its drama. There was very little drama in it. No raised voices, no formal gestures, no grand speech. What made it stay in the minds of those who heard it was how small it was. 90 seconds. 2 steps. One small loop of wire. A 4-year-old girl and a soldier with white gloves, and a rule he broke without making a single sound. Hayward left the military in 2023, after completing his full term of service, including 2 overseas tours. He spoke rarely about his years in the Guards, and almost never about that particular morning. But in a conversation with a former colleague, recounted years later, he apparently said that in all his years of service, with all its formal occasions and important duties and moments that felt historically significant, the thing he thought about most was the 90 seconds he spent kneeling in the mud by a hedgerow in Windsor. Not because it was important, he said. Because it was right. Charlotte, for her part, grew into exactly the kind of young royal that those who knew her as a child might have predicted: confident, direct, warm, and possessed of a quiet certainty that sometimes surprises people who expect royalty to be more distant. Whether that morning had anything to do with who she became is impossible to say. Children are shaped by thousands of small moments, most of which they never consciously remember. But there is something worth noticing in the fact that a 4-year-old girl, confronted with a problem and a wall of protocol, did not panic and did not give up. She looked for the person who could help. She walked up to him. She asked. And she waited, with complete trust, for him to decide. That is not a small thing. That is, in its own quiet way, a kind of courage. And on the other side of that exchange, the soldier who stood straight and still and then, just once, chose to be a person instead of a uniform, there was a kind of courage too. The kind that does not make speeches or seek attention. The kind that kneels in the mud and works carefully and then stands up and smooths its tunic and goes back to standing straight, as if nothing happened. As if 90 seconds were nothing at all. As if, sometimes, 90 seconds is everything.